Welcome back to Natural 2, our D&D and tabletop role-playing podcast, and happy holidays since this video will be coming out on the 24th, so we are right around that Christmas time. But today on Natural 2, I kind of wanted to slow things down a little bit, or I guess focus on something not so, I don't know, clickbaity or energizing, but bringing back cliches or kind of leaning into stereotypes to some extent, or at least not being afraid of those things or being scared of finding your own flavor of those aspects. The thing, or I guess my pitch at the beginning of all of this would be like, as a DM, when I'm thinking of a campaign or a story, or I'm giving players advice about like the character concepts they bring to me, there's almost, I guess, like a community stigma of like, oh, if you bring a rogue that had orphaned parents, like, you know, how dare you? No one will ever do that. That's been done a million times. And there are times that advice, or I guess that criticism is valid, but you could very much could bring a rogue with the shady orphan archetype and make it a very interesting character. It is not impossible to do so. And if that's what you're excited to do or the story you're excited to tell, then there's avenues of making that happen. But that's kind of the broad, I guess, topic that I have.
I think that what I said before we started recording is that a cliche, or I feel like that word is not even, it's a little too derogatory, I think. Or it's sending
Stereotype
the wrong.
is kind of
Yeah,
close.
well,
Yeah.
I think stereotype's worse,
Yeah.
but it's setting the wrong tone. But the message for me is that a cliche is just a shortcut, and shortcuts can be detrimental sometimes, but they could also be valuable. It can be useful to get to the place you're trying to go a little quicker so that you can move on to where you're trying to get to next.
I think most often where I see this brought up, because there are a few different, posts or videos or whatever kind of addressing this topic or trying to analyze this topic, it is almost the meta perception of fearing that your players or your audience, which again, your player is kind of your small audience, of like catching on that you are leaning on something that a million people have done before, or you're like kind of beginning a story that everyone has seen or everybody knows. And once that like illusion is shattered, once that thin veil of mystery is gone, a lot of the game is gone. And I think my alternative to that, or at least the analyzing that I've done, is if you present something, again, that's very bland or that's been done 1,000 times to your group, they're going to do with it what they want. They're going to get out of it what they want, and they're going to put their own spin on it. I think the only times that it does become bad for the game or not entertaining or pushing them out of their immersion is when that isn't allowed, when their input and their direction is not taken and then added to what was presented. And so again, applying this to all the different spaces that this might show up, like, you all meet in a tavern. Everyone's like, oh, of course, we all meet in a tavern. But I assure you that every proper group that has a good flow and a good energy and trusts each other and sitting down to have a good time, they'll have a blast meeting in the tavern. There's no problem with that. And as long as you flow with what they're going with and then come up with something that everyone's entertained with, totally fine. But it does apply to like all the different parts of the game that you might feel worried about including something that's been done before and then getting in your head of trying to be the most unique, most original, most, creative person possible, which is not only draining but impossible. So.
And I think that something to remember first is that as much as people talk about avoiding cliches or common tropes, I hate that word too, but it's actually the right word.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just have an irrational hatred of it. I never go on TV Tropes either. Like, I hate that website. People swear by it. I hate it. I'll never go on it because I don't want to spend all my entertainment consuming time pointing at the screen or at the page and going, "Oh, that's this trope. Oh, that's that trope. Oh, they're doing that one."
Hmm.
It would make me nuts. I would
Hmm.
hate it. Anyway, um, as much as it can be good to avoid things that are overused, sometimes it's worth turning that inside out and saying, am I changing this just to be changing it? You know, am I doing something different so that I can say that I avoided a trope? Because um, that can be hollow and that can leave people confused or bored if there's not a point to what you have presented. Um, you're if you're running a game, the time when you're worried about cliches and tropes is when you are doing something pivotal or important. Because in the middle of a game, you're riffing off what the players are doing and they're reacting to what you're doing. So that story's telling itself. It's out of your control in many ways. So what we're talking about is probably the beginning of a campaign, the beginning of an arc, or the introduction of a character, or just something else that is important. And so you can have you have the luxury of saying something. You have the luxury of having a point, having a message. Um, so it's okay to one say to yourself, like, if there's not a reason to do this wildly differently, then maybe I don't need to. Just get to the important part. Um, and also, people enjoy recognizing things. Like they enjoy feeling like they can understand what's going to happen or what is happening. It's not always just, oh, I've seen this before. Sometimes it's like, hey, I know what that guy's doing, and that can be exciting, that can be fulfilling, and that can also be a way to set the players up for a pivot later that will be surprising and delightful. So not always a bad thing. I've got other thoughts, but I'm going to stop there so we can move forward. Speaking
No,
of moving forward.
I think one thing to acknowledge in this conversation is it's kind of a challenging and situational problem, right? Like this is going to vary drastically from one group to the other because one group might actually want tropes or kind of rely on tropes, or they literally enjoy taking stories from somewhere else and then playing it out with their characters. Like that might be something people are seeking out. But I think overall, the kind of general consensus is people want this buy-in where they believe the story that they are participating in and experiencing and adding to is this kind of wholly unique thing. And while I think that's mostly achievable, you do also have to realize that there's a baseline reliance that I think all players have, all DMs have, anybody who's in the fantasy RPG spectrum or whatever system you might use, that you are building at least somewhat off of what has come before you, right? Like when I say, oh, we're doing a middle fantasy or a high fantasy setting, there's a lot of assumptions and a lot of like legwork already being done with just those simple statements. If I say we're doing a Tolkien-esque fantasy or Warhammer-esque fantasy, or we're doing cyberpunk sci-fi, like these are things that help construct a lot of things so you're not sitting there for months before the game going like, well, this is how this system works and this is how this government works, but it's not like your traditional democracy because like while those things can be interesting and some players might be really involved in that, more often than not it's a lot of wasted energy as far as the game is concerned. But that's like, again, like the two sides of the coin that I'm trying to represent, because I know that I'm going to be coming off of like, oh, it's fine, just have them meet in a tavern, let them be edgelords, just let them go wild. But yeah, there's two sides of the coin of there's times to use it, there's times to not. I'm just kind of advocating for stopping the bandwagon of just shitting on it all the time, because it's getting a little cliche.
Whoa.
That
Inception.
was awful. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, being different for the sake of being different is not a virtue in and of itself.
Mhm.
And I want you to consider And again, I want you and I want you to consider cups. Okay? Cups have been around for tens of thousands of years. Probably one of the first things that we made with our hands, digging in the dirt. No, this wet dirt sticks together. That's kind of funny. We've been making cups for a long damn time, and there's billions of them, trillions of them. There may be more cups than people on Earth. Who knows?
I would
There's a
imagine
lot.
there would be.
Yeah, there's a lot. So this is going somewhere, I promise. So we've been making cups for a long time, and you'd think that after all these millennia, we would have figured out the perfect cup, and every cup would look exactly the same. But we haven't. And furthermore, I'm willing to bet that most of you out there have gone to a restaurant or you've gone to somebody's house and you've been like, "Damn, that's a nice cup. I want this cup. Where did you get these? I want to know where to get this cup. This is a great cup." Or conversely, why is this cup like this? I'm dribbling all over myself. Like I can't take a sip without like running down the side. Like this is terrible. It was made with lead paint. Like what the hell is this? My point is that even something as simple as a cup that we rely on every day, we've seen every day for almost our entire lives. Man has been working with cups for longer than written history, I imagine. When the effort has been put in or when the talent is involved in making that cup, you recognize it and you appreciate it. And so my point is that even if you're doing something that's been done 1,000 times, you put in some effort, it'll feel good and your players will appreciate it.
Yeah. The kind of personal reason that this all came up, or the reason that I wanted to kind of talk about this, and the more, my kind of example, is when I was running his Millionth Adventures, especially during the beginning, I was incredibly afraid of you guys being able to predict what was going to happen, or having a sense of like what the finale might be, or what the end of an arc might look like. And what that kind of led to is me putting in problems or subverting things or twisting things on its head for no actual reason, or even very rarely, I hope, against the player's wishes to some extent. Though I tried very hard not to do that, but I'm sure it did happen.
Just
So
had a little bit of spite, perhaps.
maybe not spite, but if you guys like start harping on like, oh, we know where this is going, well, you fucking don't know where it's going now, bud. Like that kind of energy, which is not the best
Right.
to have. But yeah, that's why I wanted to talk about it, is because it was something that I wasn't comfortable with or aware about or had a good mentality about when starting D&D, and I probably still don't have the perfect mentality, hence why we are discussing it. But yeah, I would hate to see a lot of other DMs, or just players, I guess, as well, being scared of just being comfortable using these things, relying on these things, or enjoying them. Like, you don't have to feel guilty enjoying a very generic story or a very generic character. Like, the character that I've always wanted to play in a long-term campaign is a, like, hardy, lawful good dwarven paladin or cleric. Oh yeah, he's real fucking unique. Never seen that one before. So I don't know. I just want to make sure that everyone is aware. I'm giving you my permission for whatever that's worth, which is absolutely nothing. You can rip everything off. You can be as basic bitch as possible. Do whatever you want. Let your, I guess, let your creativity flow doesn't really fit well in that recommendation, but I think you know what I'm saying.
Well, the things that we're talking about, like something comes up a lot because it's fun or interesting or satisfying. It wouldn't keep coming up if it weren't.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all at that point, it's just about there again, putting in the effort to make it solid, to make it good, or, to give it a trajectory that can be interesting. Um, and and knowing along those lines, and when we're talking about putting in the effort, making something different for its own sake is not enough. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
not enough effort. That is, again, that's going to feel hollow. It's not going to be, the people at the table are not going to walk away from that game thinking, well, at least it wasn't, you know, this trope off of tvtropes.com. Like,
Well,
they're
I
not
was
going to do that.
having no fun at all until I finally, all of my concerns were answered when the villain didn't monologue. Jeez, like, I'm so happy that didn't happen.
All right. I'm going to go post on Reddit, like, the big bad didn't monologue. Best DM ever. Uh,
It's
I,
funny because, like, we are making an extreme case, but that is stuff that I've kind of seen before.
yeah. And as a player, there's a warning in there for us. Even if you do recognize some of these things, don't harp on it because it doesn't make you look smart. Just enjoy it. Have a private moment of glee. Uh, because at worst, you might end up um spoiling it for yourself and for the rest of the group when the DM goes, "I'll show you." Uh, so be cool, okay? Be cool about it.
Well, I think harping on it is probably the best term to use because it's totally fine to recognize it and to maybe even like try and work it into what you were enjoying, but making a meme out of it or being kind of like shitty or smarmy about it is when that becomes a very big issue. Like you should not get enjoyment by ruining the other people's enjoyment. And when you're sitting there poking holes in the DM's plan or the DM's world or whatever, you are actively trying to interfere with the DM's enjoyment. And so that would be the, I guess, behavior that you might want to try and control a little bit or all of.
And I think that the DM, the interaction between the DM and the players is the most at risk for this kind of interaction because even though the dynamic is not antagonistic, even though the DM is not against the players, it's not players versus DM, and the DM will always win in that situation anyway, so don't waste time worrying about that. But sometimes we can get this false sense that it is, or we can it can feel like it is even though it isn't sometimes, and so that makes it easier to fall into a little bit of a bad habit of like trash talking.
Mm-hmm.
I think every player of D&D has trash talked their DM at some point, and the DMs have trash talked the players at some point.
Well, sometimes it's our job.
Sometimes, but just know that um, under the hood, the things that are underpinning this entire experience are a cooperative effort.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't need to needle or let the harping and the trash talk get out of hand. So if you think that you might be doing a lot of that, here's a little public service announcement in the middle of this conversation. If you think you might be doing a lot of that, just check yourself a little bit, maybe.
I probably should have asked you this before, but we'll see if you can come with it on the spot. Is there a time in your whole D&D career that you've either participated in a trope or cliche or seen another player or even the DM introducing something and had that initial fear of like, here we go, but then having a better conclusion at the end of it? Has that been something you've personally, like, I guess, analyzed or acknowledged?
Why don't we start with your example,
Okay.
and I'll keep thinking.
Okay. Well, while you think of your example, James, so this makes sense in editing, from our game, because again, a lot of my experience, if not all of it, comes from His Million Adventures so far. That's been my main plunge into D&D. But from our game, the one surprise maybe isn't the best, but subverted my expectations in the best way possible is one of our players brought Jarek, the character, early in our campaign, and he wasn't your stereotypical bard. He wasn't going to go and seduce the dragon and do the whole like meme thing, but he was very much a chaos monkey. Like he just like wanted to latch onto everything and cause problems and set things on fire and just like go crazy. And by the end of his character, when he eventually ended up giving himself over, heroic sacrifice, it was probably one of the most I don't want to say realistic characters, but I guess like emotionally impactful characters that I had DM'd for or like seen the story of. Like he took this concept that if you brought to my table and I didn't know you and you just laid it out in front of me, I'd be like, whoa, I don't know about this one. And he took this thing that I'd see like a million red flags popping up off of it. And he actually made it work. And it did, I remember somewhere in the middle of the campaign, started like the cogs in the back of my head of like, maybe I should try not assuming as much or thinking that I kind of know the answer or the end of certain things. Like, there is still a lot of potential to be surprised because I don't know everything, which I try not to have that mentality, but it's been known to happen. So yeah, that was a very eye-opening experience, and I very much appreciate him for doing that because it helps me be a lot more open to people's character concepts without being so judgmental. It allows me to have hope for characters that I'm not currently enjoying, because that does happen very, very occasionally. That there is some path that they can improve. So, I don't know. I really, really enjoyed that. And again, the trope of the chaos, burning, orphanage, blowing up character becoming this meaningful party glue. Pretty cool. He almost did the Sid adventure from Ice Age.
I I would agree with all of that. I think that I he absolutely was and probably is an agent of chaos, but there's an important skill in the game and in life that I think that he has, which is knowing when to quit.
Mhm.
So that sometimes that's all it takes. You know, that's the difference between a good memory and a bad one. The thing that comes to my mind, it's the only thing I can think of right now, is again in as Miliath Adventures, Novin as the recurring villain. Early on, there was something of like Rita Repulsa or Cobra Commander or something,
Mhm.
where we just got finished beating up this whole passel of bad guys, and Shredder hurls some insults at us and then repels into the sky.
I'll catch you
Uh,
later, Batman.
yeah, just um, the little bit of mustache twirling, you can't touch me um, villain, which was subverted and then it was subverted again because the first arc that I was in the game for, we killed him.
I remember that, like catching you guys
Or
off guard.
or we thought that we killed him. Uh but then he seemingly had come back, and so by that time it was like, oh, okay. All right. Um and then kind of subverted again with the reveal that that there were multiples, that we had killed Novin, but also there was more Novin.
Hmm.
It wasn't just the same guy that had come back. Um, so that was a good use of that idea, I think.
Hmm.
Like that's probably a good example of taking something that's a little bit of a cliche, but um, turning it into something you can use, and turning it into something with some direction, some momentum.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh, that's what I would say.
What that spawned from is there's so many people online that are like, oh, I don't know how to do a reoccurring villain, or I don't know how to have like a villain that's involved with the PCs, because as soon as I put them on the battle map, they just want to kill them, and it's so complicated to like have them get away, and like it's something that's been talked about to death in all tabletops, but D&D a lot.
Yeah.
And so before our campaign started, I kind of knew, or I guess when it was gearing up, Like I wanted to have some sort of, overarching antagonist. But I didn't want it to be the stereotype of like, oh, he just poofs away or he snaps his fingers or whatever, whatever. But yeah, I remember the session that you just ran up and you poured all your smites into him, and everyone's preparing for this like big climactic boss battle, and I'm like, well, how do you want to do this? And everyone's like, wait, what?
What?
Like,
It was effective too because I don't think you. It was. I was new enough that you may not have had a sense of this at the time. Recurring villains are a pet peeve of mine. I hate them. If my answer to that guy on Reddit, like, oh, I don't know how to, they're gonna kill him as
don't.
soon as he gets
Yeah.
on the battle map. Don't put him on the battle map. If you put him on the battle map, that's an invitation to kill him. Don't and yanking him away at the last minute. That's Lucy in the football, man. That's all that is. So don't put him on the battle map. If you want to have a recurring villain that actually interacts face to face with the party, that needs to be happening in these social situations where the party would have a problem on their hands if they attacked him out of nowhere. Like they bump into him at the ball for the princess's coming out and introduction to society, so they can't just murder him in the middle of this ballroom. That's how you do that. Anyway, I hate recurring villains, so that's why I ran up to him, and that's part of why I ran up to him and was like, "You're going to get all of this," is because I didn't want him to escape. Also because he was a magic user and the spells were nasty, but so I might have been the best person to pull that on because I walked in, once the initiative was rolled, I was already thinking like, I'm going to get him. And then when I did, whoa, really?
It's like the dog catching their tail. You're like, oh, well, shit, what now?
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
it worked.
Well, I'm glad that that worked out because I'm sure there are a whole number of times you can bring up that my subversions did not work out. But
Anytime you take a risk, like you win some, you lose some. You take the lesson and move on.
But yeah, the whole reason I wanted to go over examples is to try and showcase that, yeah, the cliche or the trope or the stereotype of the reoccurring villain, which I imagine every single D&D party has messed with to some extent. There's so many ways to do that. There's so many ways to learn more about your players and what they want and what their expectations are, and then feeding that or playing off of that in some creative way. While I did participate fully in the reoccurring villain trope, he was reoccurring, he kept coming back, it was in a way that allowed you guys to believe it, to feel good about yourselves to some extent, and, move on with the story. And so that would be my best example, hopefully, of how to try and approach these things in a cool way, but still use them because they are still useful.
This video, in my opinion, is a good companion video to the one that we did on taking motifs and plot points from other stories, from other fiction, from other media. I feel like these go hand in hand. So do check that one out once you're finished with this one. And on your way, like and subscribe and comment your favorite cliche, the one that you're going to use next, so that we can all judge you.
Exactly. It's honestly one of my favorite hobbies to judge a game that I'm reading about on some Reddit post with knowing nothing about it and having all of these assumptions that are probably 100% inaccurate.
I think 2/3 of the internet is built on that energy, on that power source of people judging other people.
You're sitting there and you're like scrolling through your phone and you're like, oh, we have a rogue and a barbarian, a bear totem Goliath. I know where this is going.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I think we've covered all our bases, sir.
A good conversation, I think, and we've got one more episode for 2022.
Indeed. Yes, again, happy holidays. While that's relevant, that will certainly date this video at some point. but it is coming out the day before Christmas, so I think it has to be said. But yeah, hopefully we
Santa
said
hats in the thumbnail.
yeah, there you go. That won't be bad, but no, I hope everybody learned something from this, or at least had some thought of theirs challenged or poked in some way, shape, or form. It's always a learning experience here because God, I never claimed to have all the answers. So,
Till next time.
have a good one.